All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is the work session on NBD, our quarterly update. We're excited to hear about all the new efforts under NBD and consistent efforts that are ongoing. So with that, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Miller, and he will introduce the team and go forward.
Thank you, President Melendez. I appreciate the opportunity once more to talk to council. We've been fortunate to have an opportunity to do this every quarter for as long as I've been in the department. So it's been very helpful to have a time on the schedule to have these discussions. What we're going to talk about today, and let me see. So, okay, there we are. I'm just going to talk quickly about the team. We're going to give you an update on land management. We're going to talk briefly about the Neighborhood Service Center offices. We will talk about the Housing Trust Fund. We'll talk about rehab of houses, and then there will be some opportunity for questions and answers and discussion. The team that I have been very fortunate to inherit is made up of Ann De Silvatella, who is the Assistant Commissioner, Eric Frisch, who has joined us from DES and is now the Deputy Commissioner and also heads Neighborhood and Business Development, Kurt Martin, who is a longtime and very knowledgeable person in NBD about anything to do with inspection, compliance, buildings and zoning, is the Director of Buildings and Zoning. And Daisy Rivera Algarin is the Director of the Neighborhood Service Centers. Daisy's been here for a couple days. I remember way back when I was working on things like Brooks Landing, and Daisy was down in business development and moved all the way around. We have a few other folks joining us today because they are our subject matter experts on some of these topics. Leah Anselm is here from Carol Wheeler's Housing Department. Carol Wheeler is here, Manager of Housing, and I think you all know Carol from her long and dedicated service to the city. Johanna Santiago is here from the rehab area within Kurt's department. And Jill Simons is here from land management. Jill is really running that program or project, and it's a very significant effort that is being undertaken right now. So just a quick overview. I think you all know NBD. We've obviously talked about NBD a lot, but just really quickly, we do a lot. We're not the largest department by personnel count, but we do cover a fairly wide range of activities, including business development. And these are listed in alphabetical order. So business development, contract services, rehab, demolition. I mentioned Johanna being responsible for that. Grant management, number of different grant programs, housing, and that includes affordable housing, market rate housing, projects to help prevent evictions, projects to help people purchase houses, an area that is responsible for all of our HUD compliance. As you know, we receive a tremendous amount of funding from the federal government through housing and urban development. It's a set of alphabet programs like the Community Development Block Grant or the Emergency Services Grant, or HOME, which is surprisingly not an acronym, or HOPWA, which is an acronym, Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS. So we handle all of those. We handle code enforcement, inspection, and compliance, which is an area that you've expressed significant interest in. The neighborhood preservation area, which is the neighborhood service centers, our permit office, our real estate division, and zoning. So a lot that goes on, 152 people. Most of those folks are here in City Hall, but we do have the 4 neighborhood service centers. And our organization is 54% minority, 58% female, and an average age of 50 years old. So a lot of 50s in there. But we do have, and we're working very hard to get some younger folks in here because we all won't be here forever, surprisingly. So we're going to talk about land management, and I'm just going to kind of introduce the topic, and then I'm going to let Jill talk about it. But everyone knows that, and I say this a lot, and I'm sorry for repeating myself, but the city is really, any city, our city in particular, but any city is really just a collection of properties. You take all these properties, you draw a boundary around them and say, okay, this is a city. Our city happens to have, 66,000 plus properties. And we have to manage those properties just like we would manage any other asset. So land management is an important part of what we do. And we're working very hard, and Jill is doing a tremendous job of modernizing our technology and our operations. And we're implementing a new system called Infor Public Sector. And it replaces a number of old and existing and disconnected systems. And you see them listed here. You'll hear people talk about BIZ. I have to get into BIZ. I have to look something up in BIZ. It's a mainframe-based system. It runs under CICS, which is an old IBM program from 1969. It's a very, very challenging thing to update and keep current. But we also have a number of other systems. So I'm going to let Jill just kind of walk us through the rest of this, if you wouldn't mind, please, Jill.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks, Commissioner. So as was mentioned, we're replacing a variety of systems that are disconnected and each serve a role in the work that we deliver in buildings and zoning and in the NSCs. One of the things just to have on your radar is that as we're working through the process, we're making sure we're aligned with what the legislation says. And in some cases, we need to make sure the legislation speaks to the digital era and we can do things online and that kind of thing. And in other cases, we need to streamline our processes. So some legislation has come before council to do that kind of streamlining, housekeeping type amendments, and there might be more in the future. So you might see more from NBD on this topic in the coming year. Next slide.
Yep.
Okay, so the volume of work that we're doing is really the key driver for the need for a new system. You probably have seen a lot of this kind of stuff. It's in a lot of our KPIs, or has been historically. 24,000 properties in the city have a renewable certificate of occupancy. That's our rental inspection program, and 4,000 of those are renewed on an annual basis. So we have 26 inspectors, going in and out of 4,000 properties just on the C of O program alone. On top of that, we're issuing notice and orders, tickets. We're doing lead dust wipes, which is an important program for us. Our permit office estimates there's about 30,000 touches per year. So phone calls, walk-ins, emails. It's a really busy place. We're issuing 9,000 to 13,000 permits annually, or about 60 to 70 permits per day. In the summer, it's much higher, and in the winter months, it's often a bit slower. The special zoning processes, the City Planning Commission, Zoning Board, all of that, there's about 300 of those a year. And we have 25,000 licensed trade professionals in the city, individuals like licensed plumbers, licensed electricians, and then we do 50 to 100 demolitions a year. So all of that work is being done in our department, and the numbers are growing, which is a good news story when it comes to permits and stuff like that. Next slide. So just to walk you through a little bit of where we've been, this is where our system started. It was sort of like what we used to have card catalogs in the library. That right there is a permit record. All of these little recipe cards were digitized onto our mainframe in the 80s. The mainframe runs on COBOL. And as the commissioner said, it's tough to maintain. Next slide. This is what it looks like when you log in. It does what it does well, but it only gives you that snippet of information at a time. It literally took what was on the recipe card and put it into this system. So it doesn't have workflow. It doesn't tell you what's going on in the process. It doesn't tell you who had it last. It's really just a snippet of information that's captured this way as opposed to the recipe card. Next slide. This is an example of Infor Public Sector. So this is the software solution that we're moving to. It is a more modern solution. It's a software as a service, so it's hosted in the cloud for us. It'll be continuously maintained and updated. We have a system administrator on staff who's working with us to build it out and who has the skills to keep us evolving and optimizing the system and our processes going forward. So we've been in the middle of building this out for the last 4 months. And next slide.
And before I do that, I just want to point out a couple things, because Jill said this, but I think it's just very important to understand that you'll see like 3 green dots here, and those 3 green dots are points along the process that let us know exactly where this is. The first one says intake, the second says fees due, the third says application and review, and then it goes on to say other steps that have to be accomplished, but allows us to see exactly what the status is on, in this case, this is a request for a building permit for new construction. So we'll be able to see all of these things. It shows what's due, unpaid balances. So these are pieces of information that allow us to be able to answer questions more efficiently and more effectively as people have questions about where we are with any given request.
That's a great point, and that's true also for our customers. So right now, once they submit to us, they have to call us or email us to get that update. The system will allow them to log in like other online systems you're used to using and see what step it's at along the way. So the online system will allow folks to apply, make payments, download copies of their permits or whatever documents they have. They're going to save time and money by not having to come into City Hall. They won't need to submit their giant rolls of plans until the very end of the process. So those big rolls of plans can cost a lot of money for folks. And one of the things, although we're providing an online access point for the public and serving folks in that modern digital way, we also want to free up time so that the folks who need the help person to person in the office, we have time to sit down and help people who still need to come in the front door and do it that way. So by streamlining our processes, we can align our work in different ways. Right now, it all just comes in one way and we just manage everybody the same way. And this will allow us to respond differently to people's different needs. And again, having access to data and dashboards, so where it is in the process, also just trends, what's going on right now? How many permits are under review? How many were issued last month? How many properties have code enforcement cases? And of those cases, what's happening on no heat? How many properties have no heat? Let me see the list. Let me look at it. Let me get my hands on that trends and that information. And that's the kind of stuff we will have more access to in a more modern system. And then to make this way of working easier for our staff, we're looking at adopting tools like this picture of a plan review table there. It's more like a drafting table where it's on an angle. You can touch it and mark it up. So rather than right now, our staff spends a lot of time on the phone or by email communicating with the development community about the changes that are needed, this is going to allow them to put it right on the plans and work in a way that's much more easy for them and easier for the people receiving the comments to get that feedback. So we're implementing phase 1 soon, mid-March, and then phase 2, which is phase 1 is trade licensing, phase 2 is permits, and that's coming in the summer in August, and then phase 3 is code enforcement, the end of the year, January 2023.
Sorry.
So,
yep.
Sorry. Got ahead of myself there. So this is what we're up to right now. Phase 1, the trade licensing and elevator certification, property manager license, we're getting ready to go. If and when that becomes a program this summer, it's building permits. That includes inspections on those permits, all of the zoning stuff, as well as business permits. And then phase 3 is all of the code enforcement stuff. So our rental inspection program, the C of O renewals, the code enforcement, the ticketing complaints, high grass and weeds, and nuisance points will be part of phase 3. So we have staff across NBD working on this right now. We have staff in the IT department. I can't emphasize enough how much of a collaborative process this is and has been. And we're working with folks in finance, just right across the board, people helping us get this thing in place and connected to existing city systems to work effectively.
Right. And that also includes a lot of work because currently right now, when people pay for these things, when they pay for a building permit or they pay for a license, we have folks over at the counter that actually have to take the payment for those things. So we have to also implement a whole new cashiering system that allows those credit cards or other kinds of payments to be taken and processed appropriately. So there's an awful lot to do with this project, but it is moving along very well. And as Jill said, we will see the first phase of this going live starting in March, which is obviously just a month away. So okay, I'm gonna move to the next topic, which is an NSC office update. I am going to say a couple things and then I'm going to let Daisy talk. There was a question, and it's mentioned here about NBN. And for those of you who've been around for a long time, like me, you will remember NBN, or Neighbors Building Neighborhoods. It was a project that was started back in 1993 and went live in 1994. The city was divided into 10 areas that were called sectors. It started up in Charlotte, and Charlotte was Sector 1. And then the Maplewood area was Sector 2, and the Josana area was Sector 3, and the Southwest was Sector 4, and downtown was Sector 5. And they just went around the city and numbered all of these sectors. And then each sector was responsible for planning within their sector. The point of NBN was to try and empower neighborhood associations. Each of the areas had neighborhood associations, either active or starting. And so the goal was to empower them. The NBN project included funding for the sectors. Each sector was given $5,000 a year to use for whatever they needed to use it for. Some of the sectors used it to publish a newsletter. Some of the sectors used it to hire some staff. Some of the sectors used it to help with things like banners or public improvements. But it was money for each sector to use. And toward the end, and this was during Mayor Johnson's term, he identified and pulled $1 million out of the budget and said to each sector, each of the 10 sectors, you each will get $100,000 to do a project in your sector, but it has to be a bricks and mortar project. It has to be something that I can come to and cut a ribbon on. But it's up to you as a sector to determine what to do with that $100,000. And so, it was a different level of empowering neighborhoods. And unfortunately, when Mayor Johnson left office, NBN left office with him. It was disbanded. The folks who were running it were either reassigned or terminated. And so it's been a challenge ever since. Mayor Evans said to me, I want something like that back again. I want this to be recreated. It doesn't have to be called NBN. It doesn't have to be exactly the same as NBN, but it has to be something that is more empowering to the neighborhoods than what we have right now. So that's a direction that we in NBN have been given. I'm sorry, we in neighborhood and business development, so NBD, NBN, too many acronyms. So this is a direction that we have been given. We will continue to look at ways to do this. I wanted Daisy to say something though about the current NSC offices, And then I just wanted to make sure that you understand that we want to hear from you as council members who represent areas of the city, whether you're a district or at large. You have that ongoing and regular feedback and communication with the neighborhood associations and the folks that live in the city. So we want your input too. Just to go back and try to recreate something that existed is probably not going to be 100% the right thing to do, because time has changed, people have changed. So we may not want to just go back and try to recreate NBN, but we do want to do something different. So Daisy, why don't you just talk about the the first few bullets that we have here, please.
Happy to. Thank you, Commissioner Miller. The NSC, as you all know, have 4 offices and 1 in City Hall for a total of 5. Our offices are, most of them, I think, centrally located in the quads that they represent. And these offices are headed by administrators and assistant administrators. In this case, I'm going to just talk a little bit to what the administrators do in overall day-to-day type of operation. One of the things that we are known for is to come by and pick up a permit, get a grant application for rehab and other city services like handicap permits or business permits. On a day-to-day, we address quality of life issues. That's usually the first thing waiting for us in our emails in the morning and phone calls. And we also manage the nuisance point system. We do that with the police department and our law department. We assist neighborhood, business associations, and Block clubs. We meet with them monthly. Many of you have attended our meetings, and as you can see from the attendance, they are, I think, very well engaged. We get anywhere from 30 to 51. We recently had one that had 81 people present. We meet also regularly with business associations. Because of COVID, many of them have gone to either stopping into each office and to each business, the presidents, and meeting with the business owners, because some of them still are not comfortable in being in person. We're getting there slowly, but not as fast as I like to see it, but we're getting there. And as Commissioner Miller just shared with you, the next bullet here is information and conversations that he's had with Mayor Evans.
Thank you, Daisy. So we're going to move on to the next topic, which is the Housing Trust Fund. And as you know, as City Council, you've already approved a resolution that allows the formation of the Housing Trust Fund and additional capitalization. So I will let housing take over from here and just talk about the next steps, things that have been completed, and what we're planning beyond that. So.
Great. So for those of you who are sick and tired of listening to me come and talk to you about all the different things that we've been working on, we're still working on it. As you know, you approved the official formation of the Housing Trust Fund. Thank you very much. And our first capitalization in December. We also had some presentations around our consultant who did a very thorough job of looking through, what does Rochester need? How is Rochester special? Recommendations on revenue and best practices for administrative and governance structure to make sure that if we're going to go through all of this work, it's actually going to be successful. And then we know that we have $3.3 million identified in the city's ARPA plan that will allow us to kind of further capitalize the Housing Trust Fund over the next 3 years. We sort of assume about $1 million a year, as well as staffing and administrative costs. Next slide. So now that we've talked about, yay, we've done all these things, it never ends. So the next steps are administration. The decision was made through the ADLN team based on the recommendations of the consultant as well, that we will be creating a standalone entity. I'm a very examples-based person, so for me, it was easier to think of it as similar to, but not the same as the Land Bank or Redco. Theoretically, it will be staffed by city employees to do the day-to-day work, much like the land bank where there's a shared services agreement. The law department is currently kind of reviewing from the law perspective, how to best do that and create an entity that is, transparent and accountable and, best able to serve the needs that we've decided are good for Rochester's community. We're still working on a lot of the aspects of governance. We're sort of using the consultant recommendations to inform our decisions on the appropriate mix of board members, really focusing on how we want our mission to look, and getting in the weeds of bylaws, board requirements, responsibilities to, again, really make sure that this is serving our target communities to the best of our ability. We really want to stress, I think I've stressed it in every single one of these meetings, that all of our recommendations prioritize residents who are directly impacted by or eligible for the available activities to be serving on the board and, really kind of driving this bus. But we want to include a wide mix of stakeholders and other city staff or elected representatives to kind of maximize experience and insights. And then, we would be remiss if we didn't also mention that the tenant union has also submitted a draft of recommendations, which are also helping to inform all of our decision-making processes. Last and not least is we are working to select and launch the first year's Housing Trust Fund activities. I think many of those potential activities were listed in some of the reports. I won't bore you with all of those details, but we have a wide variety that have been developed and are sort of, being used as springboards. The most important takeaway from the mission is, in order to be successful, you want a targeted mission so you know who you're helping and why, but a wide enough mission so that the board can pivot each and any year, given, whatever the needs are. You haven't been too prescriptive and you can only do A, B, and C, and then you discover, oh, you actually need to do D. We want to avoid that. We want a mission that's not going to be everything to everyone, but is really going to allow, actual impact. Do I have any other slides? I don't.
You don't.
Think I do.
Thank you for that. I appreciate your comments. I do want to just make one point, because I know that most of you are familiar with this, but the point that Leah made about the shared services agreement and a standalone entity, I believe that most of you are aware that, for example, the Rochester Land Bank is a separate entity. It's the Rochester Land Bank Corporation, but it is staffed by city employees. So, for example, our director of real estate, Paul Scuderi, is also the executive director of the Land Bank Corporation. A number of people who are on his staff as city employees are also the staff of the Land Bank Corporation. And there is a shared service agreement so that every year the land bank pays a certain amount to the city to cover the cost of those employees who are doing work for the land bank. So it's a structure that has been used many times in the city. It works very well. I just wanted to point that out because it is a little bit uncommon if you haven't had a chance to see that work before. So I just wanted to point out that that is something that we're looking at for this housing trust fund, as opposed to some other entities. For example, the PAB. I mean, they're a separate entity, but they've gone off, hired their own staff, are looking for their own structure and building. So it's a different way of doing it. It's not that one is any better than the other. It's just that by using the shared services agreement, you don't have to go through and hire separate staff and pay for benefits and all of the overhead costs that actually can be shared with the city. So I just wanted to mention that before we move on, in case there were any questions about that. So I'm going to let Johanna talk about rehab grants, because There was some question about how the rehab grants work, who's responsible, who does the work, how do we validate whether the work is done correctly or not. So Johanna, would you talk to us about that, please?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. We currently provide rehab grants to property owners in the city. Right now, we have 11 contractors who provide services for our programs, which is the owner occupant rehab program. That's a program for owner occupants who own 1 to 4 residential properties to help repair with home repairs. We have the owner occupant roof programs, which is to provide assistance to replace your roof and gutters, downspouts. Next slide, please. We also have the lead hazard control program, which is provides assistance to property owners, both landlord and owner occupants, to remediate lead hazards. We have the senior rehab program, which provides assistance to eligible owner occupants over the age of 55 who own a 1 to 4 family residential property. Next slide. For our contractors who are participating in our programs, there is an application process and there are requirements that they have to meet in order to be placed on our list. One is they have to have insurance, general liability, workers' comp, and disability insurance. All three naming the city as additional insured and certificate holder. The contractors are also required to be registered on the federal system for award and management system. That is where the federal government lists any individuals who may be excluded party, so we can't contract with them. The third is that they have to be led, trained, and certified by an EPA certified agency. The company has to have a lead-based paint renovation, repair, and painting firm certification. They also have to have a supervisor who has the lead-based paint certificate. They have to have their workers on site have to have the lead-based paint abatement workers certificate, and each employee has to have the lead-based paint renovation, repair, and painting certificate. Right now, the city has, we currently have funding to offer the training for free for contractors who are interested in participating in the program. We in contract services, we have copies of the contractor insurance certificates and lead certifications on file. We make sure that the contractors have those current and that we have the current information on our file. Next slide, please. These are, we have, like I said, we have 11 participating contractors on our list. As you can see, there's 3 that are woman-owned business enterprises, and there's 5 minorities. Next slide, please. For our inspection process, we have a city's property rehab specialist who's also a certified lead abatement supervisor. They are responsible of being the construction manager for the projects. They prepare the scope of work. They also inspect the property before, during, and after construction. And at the final inspection, the property owner, the contractor, and the rehab specialist is present. They inspect the property to make sure that the work that was done was in accordance with the work scope and that they have obtained the lead-based paint clearance report, which ensures that all lead-based paint hazards have been remediated. If the work is completed to the owners and the property rehab's satisfaction, then the owner, the contractor, and the property rehab specialist will sign a certification of completion, and the city will process the payment to the contractor. Next.
Okay, thank you. We kind of went through that fairly quickly. I wanted to do that primarily so we would have some time for questions. I'm happy to have all of our staff available to answer questions that you might have about those topics. We can go back to any slide if you'd like, if there are questions that are specific to the slides, or if you have questions about the items that we've discussed. So I will, Council President, do you want to direct the questions, or do you just want to let people raise their hand? What would you prefer?
Yeah, we can, if we can take the PowerPoint down so we can all see each other, and then I'd be happy to facilitate the discussion at this point.
Okay.
Are there any questions from council members at this stage?
I have a question, and
You scared me for a minute, Mary. I thought you didn't.
it's something that, unless I missed it, you didn't talk about, and that's probably because we didn't ask you to report on it. But can you talk a little bit about the property management licensing system?
The property management licensing is not something that we've implemented yet. It is something that we're still working on. We will more likely than not be able to get that done by the end of the year. But I don't know, Kurt, do you want to say anything about property management licensing?
Yeah, same thing. You probably noticed that it was on the list of the items going live in March. And that's only one aspect of it. So right now we're building licensing, so it made sense to build that into that process. But that by no means is an indication that we are going live with it in March. We are far from that mark. And as I said in a meeting earlier, when we discussed it, that we're not rushing it. We have to get it right. Hopefully the pandemic will continue to get better and we'll get out of it and back to normal. So we're not putting something in an punitive program on property managers and owners during what has been a pretty difficult couple of years. So we're mindful of that. We're still working through the scoring system. We do have a meeting next week with our committee of landlords, property managers, and tenant union representatives to talk about that. Like I said, we are in no hurry. We don't want people to think that we are shoving this on them. And it's a collaborative effort to make sure we get it right.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Right, Councilmember Gruber, followed by Councilmember Pio.
Yes, and sorry that I'm not on video and that there's a bit of an echo. Just a question about the land management tool. It's all very exciting. We've been hearing about it for a long time, and I know that it takes a lot of time and effort to lay the foundation for that. I also know that it's oftentimes really, really difficult to incorporate new technologies and be able to actually utilize all the different bells and whistles. I've seen that in my day job. We've seen that here at City Hall with some things before from, Workday, et cetera. What are the strategies that NBD has to make sure that, are you retaining different companies to help do some technical assistance? Are you engaging with other cities who use the same tools? What's the kind of ongoing continuing education around this?
I can answer that if that's all right.
Yes.
We have a couple of things we're doing. The first is that technology doesn't solve every problem. So the ideas that we're generating, we're keeping track of that. So after we're implemented, we have work still we want to do. We have processes we want to revisit. We have things we want to continue to streamline. So once we're in the system, we need to keep working our processes to smooth them out. The software will work better if we don't have 800 steps to get something done. So we're keeping track of our to-do list after implementation. We have a contract with Infor for managed services, it's called, and that includes things like an enhancement request. So if Infor brings a new bell and whistle into the product, we're going to sit down with them, digest it, understand it, take it back, and decide if that's something we should bring into our operating environment. So those are two things we're doing. And then the other thing we're doing is one of the reasons we went with Infor is that they agreed to configure the software in a way that will work for Rochester. So we've been working with the development team at Infor to tweak the product, and they're going to roll it out in April across their entire customer base. So we've built a relationship with the folks in the development team at Infor, and we have pitched other ideas to them that they maybe don't want, but we're in the room with them and invested in making the product work for us as effectively as it possibly can. The last thing I just want to say is that we do have a system administrator on staff, Brandon Dowdy. He came to us from General Code, so he's super knowledgeable. He's learning the system from the inside out, and he's going to be our go-to person and our in-house skilled expert to keep optimizing and evolving the system.
Thank you, Jill.
Thank you very much for the answer. And that's a really thorough answer. And it sounds like you've put a lot of thought into it. So I appreciate it. That's great about Brandon. I also hope that we don't have, that we have multiple people learning those different skill sets. This is always important to do. But thank you. My last question, then I'll pass it along, President Melendez. My last question is just related to the Housing Trust Fund. Sounds like there's a lot of work done there, really exciting stuff. I'm curious from a governance perspective. So once we separate it, it's obviously operated by a board of directors. So at that point is the only governance that city council has, if and when city dollars are put into it, every time that happens, it would come to council, but otherwise it would be a kind of self-governing body. Is that the intention there?
I believe the plan is to report annually to council, much like many of the other sort of standout projects we have.
Is there, Leah, as you've looked at the governance structure, for example, the land bank board has 2 seats, one for a council member identified by the council president and for the council chief of staff. Redco has 3 members on the board that are appointed by the mayor of the city of Rochester and 2 that are appointed by city council. Is there any reason why we wouldn't want to have a relationship structure or governance structure for the task force that would not include a council member at least?
Those are all absolutely part of the discussion. We're weighing not having 20 members with having a solid amount of influence as well as know-how. So yes, there is part of the recommendation would be to have certain, elected officials. And I think how that is decided will also speak to what level of oversight or accountability to council there would end up being.
Thank you.
Thanks. Councilmember Pio.
Thank you very much. I do love to see a return to Mayor Bill Johnson's NBN program, so I'm excited very much for that. My question though is, what is our strategy to hold poor housing providers more accountable to providing safe housing and making repairs in a timely manner?
Okay, Kurt, do you want to talk about that, or do you want me to talk about that? I know you want me to.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot going on right now. There's obviously the housing task force, which we are going to make recommendations to the mayor within 90 days, 60 to 90 days. We're going to be looking at, obviously the property manager license program should help because it's going to point out the property managers that are doing a lousy job, and owners are not going to want to do business with them, and tenants are going to have the availability of actually seeing scores online. So they'll be able to make informed decisions on whether they want to actually live in a unit being managed by a certain manager that may not be the best. What else? We are going to be working on the thought, and it's just a thought right now, about incentive-based C of O program. So, I'm open to any comments on that, and looking forward to, rolling our sleeves up and thinking about the benefits of changing our C of O program to be incentive-based, if at all possible. I know there's equity issues there. We want to stay away from items like discrimination or making the program look like we're protecting the Park Avenue landlords and not the Avenue D landlords. So there's a lot to that. And I definitely look forward to anybody's input on that subject matter along the way.
Yeah, kind of a follow-up question to that would be, how many more code inspectors are we looking to hire?
Well, the budget gets submitted tomorrow.
All right.
But we have a significant need to write staffing issues, and I will leave it at that. So this is just the first year of budgets that have been not so hard on us. So we will start the process this year. So keep that in mind when you're reviewing budget. But it's just the beginning, right? It takes time to rebuild. It takes time to, work through budget process to be able to do what we want to do with adding staff. I know just this past fiscal, we were able to add one additional CEO trainee position, and that's going to help. But we need other things also along the way in B&Z to, help across our other divisions. So I'm focused on that, and I'm trying to prioritize the best I can, with my staffing issues.
And I'll just say that, we've done well, but how many vacancies do you have right now, Kurt? I mean,
in code enforcement, we have 5 vacancies that we are waiting for test results to be able to fill, and we have 6 new staff members that started with us in the last year and a half. So that's 11 staff members that are green. We're hopeful that we'll be able to get the 5 in place as soon as possible, but that's a big turnover. If you consider if you're just talking about inspection positions, that is almost half. So it gives reason to why there is some level of focus on code enforcement. There are many reasons, but that does give reason to why.
And we do have to work on that. I met with all of the code enforcement folks. Was it yesterday or the day before? I think it was the day before. And I understand their challenge, but they're all carrying a caseload of 300 or more cases that they're trying to manage. And while we were having the meeting, one inspector jumped in the chat box and said, "I have 400 cases." So, when we have vacancies, then those cases don't go away. They just get reassigned to other folks, and it just adds to the workload. So it's just very difficult to expect anyone to manage 300 to 400 cases throughout the city or throughout the area that they're working in. So we do have to understand that we've got to fill those vacancies. We've got to get people trained. This new trainer position is going to be helpful because it will help get everybody up to the same level of knowledge so that there's no discrepancy between this inspector over here saw this and this one over here saw something different. And we're not, we've had those complaints in the past from some landlords who are saying, well, I have properties all over the city, and my property over here got inspected and they didn't cite me for that, but over on the other side of the city they did. And why is that? So, we're working to resolve those kinds of things whenever they come up.
In addition to the new staff and the unfilled positions so far, we have had the unfortunate impact of 2 additional staff members out on long-term medical. So, we've been obliterated. That's a tough one to cover. I mean, if you think that, say 300 cases per person, when you're down 5, because we haven't filled those positions and down 2 others, all of that work has to be put on the shoulders of the other staff. It doesn't stop. It doesn't go away. Complaints don't stop. C of O process doesn't stop. Construction permits don't stop. And we are coming up on grass season again, which means grass doesn't stop growing and we don't stop or ignore it. So, I will say that I have not had an inspector come to me to complain about the fact that they are really being just crushed with workload. And let's not forget that they've been working out of their cars for 2 years. And kudos to them. The hard work continues. They're soldiers. They really are. They're frontline soldiers. They do hard work, and it doesn't get any easier. It won't get any easier. I don't plan on it getting any easier, but I do plan on trying to keep putting pieces in place with either more staff or thinking about how we can do things different to make things better for our tenants, our citizens.
Well, and we do hope that some of the aspects and some of the features of land management will actually help to make the job perhaps not any easier, but perhaps make some of the workflow a little bit better. So we are looking at that.
Yeah, Commissioner Miller, I'm excited about the land management system. I think there's going to be some efficiencies that get gained, on the inspection side, and also just, having something that's automated that points you to places that really need attention will be critical. And, I'm also excited about the Housing Quality Task Force. We had our first meeting this morning, and, Carol, kudos to you for managing all of that. But there was a jam board that was full of ideas. I've never seen a jam board so full. And it's just exciting that we're having these conversations. We're having discourse around housing, around the challenges post-pandemic, post-eviction moratorium. And we're not sitting idly by and watching. We're trying to figure this thing out. So I appreciate everyone's work in this space. So with that, is there any final questions? I know we have a public hearing very soon, a confirmation hearing, I should say. Any additional questions before we wrap? All right, well, thank you very much, everyone, for the updates today. This has been incredibly helpful, and I'm sure we'll have additional questions as we dive into the PowerPoint again, but we really appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time and attention. And
Thank you.
See you